Friends, may the Lord be with you. Proclamation from the Gospel according to Mark. A leper approached Jesus with the request, kneeling before him as he addressed him, "If you will to do so, you can cure me." Jesus was moved with pity, stretched out his hand, touched him, and said, "I do will it. Be cured." The leprosy left him immediately, and he was cured of the disease. Then Jesus sent him on his way after sternly warning him, "Tell no one about this. Go and present yourself to the priest and offer for your cure what Moses prescribed. That should be proof for them." The man went off and began to proclaim the whole matter freely, making the story public. As a result, Jesus was not able to enter any town openly. He went to desert places, yet people kept coming to him from all sides. The good news of the Lord. Today is the last day of the wearing of the green before we begin the Lenten season. We typically enter that on Ash Wednesday this week. I would encourage you to think before Wednesday what your Lenten practice will be this year. Give it some good thought. Spend some time with it. I would encourage you to kind of break out of maybe past traditions and try something different. About 4 years ago, I think I suggested that people maybe consider giving up church for Lent. And that was the year that the pandemic hit. And guess what? We all gave it up for more than Lent. I mean, coming to the building, that is, but church was still there. What might Lent look like? We're given in today's readings, today, the first reading and the gospel reading both speak of leprosy and mentioning people who got cured from that. Wonder what that has to do with getting ready for Lent. Does anybody know how many people in the Hebrew scriptures in the Old Testament were cured of leprosy? That spans about a 1,000-year history, the 2,000-year history there. How many people in that time were cured of leprosy that were recorded in the Hebrew scriptures? Tim, don't answer, because Tim probably knows. 2 was Moses' sister Miriam and Naaman the Syrian. And all that time, only 2 were cured. Interesting. Jesus cures a lot more than that in the Gospels. He cures a number of lepers. Leprosy is something we don't quite understand. We tend to put it into a medical category. In those days, it couldn't be reduced to any one particular situation. It covered a multitude of circumstances. The lector today, this morning's first reading, was asking me, what does it mean to muffle your beard? That was in today's first reading, that lepers were supposed to muffle their beards. And we came to the conclusion that it must mean to cover them, because leprosy in those days was something that the person who was afflicted by it, whatever the medical condition they might have had was, they had to declare themselves unclean and not associate with other folks. It was seen as a punishment rather than an illness, something done for their wrongful behavior. It's a punishment by God, so to speak. And they had to excommunicate themselves, so they would tell people unclean. And I think that if we check it later on, that muffle must mean to cover your beard so that someone coming from a distance might not hear you saying unclean, but they would see the visible act of muffling it, and they would know that they should avoid you. But it was really a shame-based practice. Again, it wasn't to do with germs and contagion. They had no idea what germs were until later on in the 1600s. They weren't afraid of catching a germ. They were afraid of associating with somebody who was shamed and who was ostracized and who was judged and who was condemned and who was separated. That's what it was all about. So it was quite remarkable when the man in today's gospel approached Jesus. He didn't say, or it wasn't recorded that he said unclean as he should have. And he asked Jesus to cure him. And Jesus did something quite remarkable. He didn't just kind of flip him a blessing to cure it. he reached out and touched him, something which would have rendered Jesus unclean. Not that he would have gotten leprosy, but he would have shared in that person's condemnation and separation and isolation. Reached out and touched him. And he cured him and he made him whole. And then it says he was moved with pity. In earlier translations of the scriptures, that passage would have been that Jesus was moved with anger. Not at the man clearly, but at the system that even allowed that man to think of himself as unclean or separate or apart or on the margins of life. His later translations were moved with pity. He restored him to wholeness, to community, to being one. I think that's a wonderful model for entering into Lent. What will our practice be to knock down those walls that continue to divide us? Lent is really a matter of the heart, not of what I do. It's the practice that we begin to take together. How will we walk this Lent? When I was growing up, it was always about giving something up for Lent. In our family, it was usually sweets or ice cream or stuff. But I always give up something, chocolates. I have a sister now, hope she's not watching. I'll get in big trouble. She continues to give up chocolates every Lent. She does it faithfully every year. It's one of her practices. And the only downside is Easter morning when it's time for the kids to get their Easter baskets. All their chocolates are gone because, so you see a lot of sad faces around on Easter because she did it, It's not how many pounds we lose. It's not about that. How do we knock down those walls? How do we connect heart to heart to those who have been judged and have been on the other side, who we keep out from human community? There's so many people who are kept out by our own church, by our own government, by our own policies. Sometimes in the name of religion, in the name of goodness, in the name of freedom even. I think of our founding fathers. I say that because back in 1776, they were all men who signed that Declaration of Independence and the first Constitution. But in those written words, they excluded, despite words to the contrary, that all men are created equal. There were certain people who were excluded from that. Certainly women were not a part of that. The indigenous folks who lived here certainly weren't a part of that. The slaves that were brought over from Africa certainly weren't part of that, all explicitly excluded. I don't think too much about that. That continues. In our own church, we keep people out by official policy. I had a wonderful meeting yesterday. It was a Zoom meeting, and it was a gathering of about half a dozen parishes who were listening to a woman who has a remarkable story. Her name is Mary Ann Duddy Burke. She's the president of Dignity USA, and she was talking about her time last month over at the Synod. She was over in Rome for the Synod a couple of months ago, and she had an encounter with the Pope. It was the first time in history, we believe, that someone who was a lesbian married woman with adopted children got an audience with the Pope. Dignity is an organization that's been around for maybe, since the 1970s. It was an organization that sought to advance the rights of LGBT folk, especially when it comes to the church, to kind of change the church's stance to be more accommodating and respectful of someone's life. I always found it interesting that they chose the name Dignity for their organization, something which others deemed that they did not have. The church would often refer to them as disordered. Imagine that. So they took the name Dignity. She has no idea how the audience came about. There was no official means to that. Kind of went through background channels. They were vetted very heavily before and got seats right next to the Pope. And they gave him a copy after a brief conversation with him. She gave them a copy of one of their latest books and some literature and a T-shirt. And the T-shirt that she gave the Pope had the Pope's. She didn't know she found this out the day before, so they had no idea what to bring. They were told they could bring him a gift, and she brought him a T-shirt that they had made up for Dignity, and it was the Pope's own words. When he was at World Youth Day last year, he addressed the youth of the world, and he said the word everyone 3 times: todos, todos, todos. So it was his own words that were meaning that the gospel includes everyone, everyone, everyone. Here's a picture of that encounter. She said that it was remarkable how much he looked like Pope John the 23rd when she was up close. He has that kind of same profile and that same look. And then when they left him, he told them to keep up the good work and to stay in the struggle. These are folks who haven't been welcomed in the Catholic Church for years, but they used to have masses in the church, and they were told 30 years ago they couldn't do that anymore. People who have kept their faith, people who identify as Catholic despite the church's pushing back and not including them. How many folks are like that? The role of women in the church. It's migrants coming to our country who are just seeking to be safe above all else. The walls that we put up, the judgments, the condemnations we put on folks. We sit back with disgust at all of the killings and wars in the world and all of the lives that are taken senselessly, failing sometimes to connect the dots, recognizing that most of the armaments in the world are produced and sold by us. Despite our own words, the words that we use, everyone, 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 our policies are often quite different. How do we begin to break down those walls? I really believe that that Lent is a time for a transformation of heart to heart. I don't believe that I get to Easter by myself. I only believe that Easter happens when we journey together. A successful Easter isn't measured by how many pounds somebody loses or how many drinks somebody doesn't have. Maybe it could be measured by how many previously marginalized voices join in the Easter Alleluia refrain.